Hey everyone, it's the Kung Fu Genius, aka Alex Richter. And if you're listening to us on audio only, I'd appreciate you rating and reviewing the podcast wherever you listen to it. And of course, if you like what I do here, don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius on YouTube and hit that bell for notifications. Are you a fan of Wing Chun Kung Fu? Well, if you listen to me, I assume you are. I got great news for Kung Fu Genius fans. Right now, you can get an all-access 1-month free trial subscription to Wing Chun Illustrated magazine. Yes, I said free. Go to WCInewsstand.com and register in the upper right-hand corner, fill in your email and password, and use the code KFGTrial to get your free trial to the issues from 2011 to the current issue. That's right, all the issues, even the one with this guy on the cover. My Kung Fu Genius column is in all the new issues, as if you need another reason to get this awesome magazine. Go get your free trial subscription today. For all that information, check out the description below. And with that, let's get started.
All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering all sorts of hot nonsense from YouTube. Lots of gems, lots of inch punch, lots of, that Shaolin story is faker than 4-stripe Adidas. Let's get to it.
He is unstoppable, unbeatable, unbelievable. He's Alex Richter, the Kung Fu Genius.
And every day, I practice martial arts. Watch out! Word is, I'm a Kung Fu genius. Practiced all day like a genius.
Yo, Dre, how you doing, man?
I'm cooling.
All right.
Just cooling, lounging, cooling.
All right.
Shoot some b-ball outside of school.
Hey, no Will Smith references anymore. I think you're not allowed to use those for the next 10 years. That's what the Academy said. Yeah. So no Will Smith references.
I just read that.
I'm sure you did. All right. So,
wow.
Yeah, we can't do that. Otherwise, we might get canceled. So anyway, here we are for another AMA. What's the first one on the plate for today?
First one out the gate. Are we ready?
We are ready.
Let's see if you got something for this one.
I don't know.
This question
it's
is
quite possible
off the rails.
It's quite possible I got nothing.
We got Tom Cruise's brother.
Tom Cruise's brother.
Louis Cruz.
Louis Cruz in the house.
Okay. Or Luis.
All right.
Sifu Richter, have you ever trained to perform the 1-inch punch? James DeMille or James DeMille.
Wow.
I like how he gets names wrong we say regularly on this podcast.
James DeMille. James DeMille wrote about it years ago, but I am not aware of anyone performing it like Bruce Lee.
That's a great question. The topic of Bruce Lee's inch punch comes again and again because, there are a couple demonstrations of Bruce Lee performing it, and it generally tends to make the rounds on social media and online. So, and you have everyone commenting on it, from Wing Chun people to MMA people to, people who don't know what they're looking at. So that's a good question.
There's always a famous thing.
Well, there's that one picture of him doing the 1-inch punch on Grandmaster Baxter.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he gave Grandmaster Baxter the 1-inch punch, according to Beardy,
very
right?
Famous photo.
Yeah, a.k.a. Dan Inosanto, a.k.a. it was a throw, not a punch. A.k.a. you were just making shit up, Birdie, while you were looking at a photo. Yes. Okay, well, a couple things about the 1-inch punch. The 1-inch punch is, in my opinion, it's deeply misunderstood by Wing Chun people, by JKD people, and by the general martial arts community at large, because I think that what people misunderstand about the 1-inch punch is that they think it's a fighting technique. So, for example, you and I are tussling, and then I just put my hand an inch away from your chest, and I go boom, and I hit you, and then you crumple, and I'm like,
yell it out too at the same time.
Have
1-inch punch.
Of course, like a proper kung fu movie.
Yes.
You have to say the technique that you're using on the person when you're defeating them with it, right? Okay.
Yes.
The crane's beak, right? The inch punch, right? Okay, you have to say it. So I think that's what people. They kind of think they're looking at when they see Bruce Lee or another Wing Chun Sifu performing the inch punch. That the idea is that in the middle of a melee, a fight, clinch, whatever, you're just going to put your hand an inch away from the person's chest and go bam, and then you're going to blast them away, and they're going to dust away like at the end of Infinity War or something like that, right? So, and that's not the idea. The idea is that the inch punch is a demonstration of a type of power we use in Wing Chun, or a type of force transfer. It is not a fighting technique. You don't just go up to random people and go inch punch and then knock them over, right?
I do.
You might, but I mean normal, like well-adjusted people.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the idea is
right,
that
you're right.
in Chinese martial arts, we talk about the something called the bridges. Okay, your arm is a bridge. Some people talk about the connection between, let's say, for example, your arm and my arm is the bridge, and other Chinese kung fu sifu just in general call the arm the bridge. So it's not always entirely clear because Chinese kung fu masters always like to. They always like to have a card up their sleeve to tell you that they're wrong. If you say the bridge is the connection between our arms, they'll say, no, actually, it's just the arm. If you say it's just the arm, they say, no, it's actually the connection between the two arms. Because especially old Chinese Kung Fu masters, they love to tell you you're wrong. So they like to have these somewhat ambiguous definitions that they can kind of like, that they can, always show you that you're doing wrong. You've been doing Wing Chun for 20 years. You don't even know basic stuff. Let me show you how you're wrong, right? Just because it's my definition of this, right? So what the inch punch is, and from my understanding, they didn't really call it the inch punch in Hong Kong at that time. I think the inch punch is something that Bruce Lee probably coined that term because it sounds better than the Chinese name for it. The Chinese name for that type of demonstration, or that type of power, I should say, is called Chun Kiu Fat Lek. Chun Kiu means long bridge. Fat means to expel or release, and Lick means power. So it quite literally means to release power in the long bridge, which is a little clunky to say in English, and even in Chinese, it's a bit wordy for Chinese standards, although Chinese is monosyllabic, so everything sounds shorter in Chinese anyway. So the idea is that in Chinese Kung Fu, if we call the arm the bridge, okay, so we're not going to call the connection between the two arms bridges. We'll just, for our definition today, we'll just say the arm is a euphemism for bridge, or bridge is a euphemism for arm. When your arm is extended or almost extended, okay, let's say mostly extended to fully extended, the Chinese call that a long bridge, because your arm is long and extended. When your arm is closer to your body, all right, in, let's say, the chambered position or further back, they call that a medium bridge, for example. All right. And if your arm is all the way back, to like in a Saukin position, you basically have no bridge or a super short bridge. But normally you have a long bridge and a medium bridge and maybe a short bridge, right? So it basically is describing how far is your arm extended. All right. And for most martial arts styles, doesn't matter whether it's traditional or not, when you launch a punch, once your punch is launched, it's long bridge. Normally, in order to punch again, you have to pull the arm back. You have to bring it back to a short bridge and make it a long bridge again. All right? So that is kind of the standard way. And that doesn't matter if we're talking about traditional martial art or modern martial art. I mean, if you look at the standard karate example, you launch your punch and the other hand is chambered all the way back. So you have a long bridge and a short bridge, no bridge punch, right? And then you have to retract this one while you punch with the other one. And then it's retracted and loaded so you can punch again. Or if it's a modern style, your hands are here close to your face, which is like a short bridge. You punch into the long bridge and then you bring it back to the short bridge, right? So in general, you have to go from long bridge back to short bridge. All the inch punch is a demonstration of is that when your arm is in a long bridge position, meaning in this case, usually not fully extended, but almost extended, you can still generate power without having to pull it back into a short bridge. That's all it's a demonstration of. It's not actually a fighting technique where you just walk up to people, put your fingers on their chest, and then blast them with it, punch like that, right? It doesn't really work that way. That is just a demonstration to say that when my arm is in the long bridge, that is to say almost extended, I can generate enough power to knock you back or knock you down or whatever. Now, mind you, the inch punch, no matter how good you are at it, is never going to be as powerful as, say, your normal Wing Chun punch that comes from the center, or a boxing punch that comes from your from the side of your cheek, or a karate punch that comes from the hip. But that's not the point. Most people can't punch at all from that range. Okay. I mean, if you take a relatively strongly built person and just tell them to slightly bend their arm and then punch, they might be able, if they're really strong and muscular, be able to get a good push or a good little shove at that range. But they usually cannot develop any kind of
push power.
Yeah, any kind of noticeable power at that range. So that is all the inch punch is a demonstration of. It just says, I can keep my arm in the long bridge and still generate, or I should say transfer, power. So that demonstration where you put your fingertips on someone's chest and they have a pad or a phone book, if the kids even know what a phone book is nowadays anymore, and then you do your, without
Yellow
retracting
pages.
your fist, you launch the punch into them and you can knock them back or knock them down. That is a demonstration of long bridge power. And then it just sounds easier when you translate into English to say inch power, right? So that is something that's ubiquitous in Wing Chun. Whether you're hitting the wall bag with the normal chain punches, you are training long bridge power. Whether you're practicing certain aspects of Buji or whatever, there's all this kind of short power. But the reason why it's super important in Wing Chun is quite obvious. When you look at the way we stick to someone's arms, our arms, especially in Pun Sao or Chi Sao, are in that long bridge position. If you are doing Pun Sao with your arms back here in front of your face, there are many different ways of doing it, but I'm not one to tell you whether you're right or you're wrong, but you can look at a photo of Grandmaster Yip Man or any famous Wing Chun master, and your Pun Sao position should not be almost touching your face, okay? In short bridge, your arms should be ahead of you. So if your arms are ahead of you, that gives you more distance between you and your opponent. That gives you more time to react and stick. And obviously it gives you good structure because your arm is not compromised and close to your body. Okay. But what this also means that if I want to hit my opponent, my arms are more at a position of extension than they would be if they were pulled back. Mm-hmm. So that means from that position, just using Pun Sao as an example, I have to be able to generate power without pulling my hand back. Because if you stick to someone's hands and you pull back before you strike, you give the other guy a chance to go in and follow you with forward pressure or to crush your position, right? Also, you telegraph your punch. If I pull back before I punch, it's also a tell. You see that my punch is coming. So the idea of generating power in the long bridge is not something that, I think it's so funny because people see Bruce Lee doing that inch punch demonstration and they think somehow he either invented it or is the only person who could do it, all right? And that's not true. I mean, Wing Chun people do it all the time, and better Wing Chun people, obviously. And the way we do Chi Sao and the way we stick and the way we hit at close range, it is all long bridge power.
Jack Dempsey.
All right? Well, that brings me to another topic. I wouldn't necessarily say Jack Dempsey's punch was a pure long bridge idea, but that brings me to another. That's the second half of what I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
So in Wing Chun, we can generate this long bridge power regardless of what position we're in. I mean, I should say that's what you're supposed to be able to do, right? And you can do it with a fist, you can do it with a palm, you can do it with your elbow, you can do it with any kind of striking tool that you normally use, and you want to be able to generate enough power to hit someone with to cause either damage or to knock them down or knock them out. That's all you need. You don't need to have, it doesn't have to be your most powerful punch. It just needs to be enough at that long range, right? All right. So Chang Kiu Fat Lek is something that all better Wing Chun people should do. And putting your hand up to someone's chest or focus mitt or a phone book or whatever is just a demonstration of your ability to do that, as opposed to that being a fighting technique. One of my friends, she's a really good kickboxer and fights competitively. And every time I have a chance to see her, we maybe train a little bit. And she asked me if I could teach her the inch punch because she was like, I want to be able to do this in the ring. And shit. I was like, well, but that's not actually how it works. It's not like something you don't just walk up and go inch punch and hit someone and go like this, right? I go, it's the idea about taking all these different little hacks about generating power and compressing them into a very short distance and short time. That's all it is. So when your hand is well ahead of you and you're trying to keep the person away, instead of having to pull back to punch or punch with your other hand, you might be able to launch a very stiff, short jab if you have a couple ideas about how to generate the power. Like, that's how inch power might work for a kickboxer, as opposed to just going to go up to someone, especially with the boxing gloves on. That's also going to kind of change the dynamic a little bit. So it was funny because even I respect her a lot for her ability to kickbox. She's like a total kick-ass kickboxer, right? But even she doesn't know much about Wing Chun or Kung Fu, saw the inch punch and thought oh, that's a technique I can learn, right? Okay. And so the misconceptions are all over the place. And so Bruce Lee was just demonstrating his ability to generate power in a very short distance. And people don't realize it's not like Bruce Lee was selling that as a fighting technique. When you see some of those demonstrations of Bruce Lee doing the inch punch, you'll notice something. especially in the earlier one, I think in the earlier Long Beach one, he stands in front of the guy that he's going to give the inch punch to, and he chambers his fist, and he goes from here to here and shows from short bridge to long bridge. And then he shows his punch. So even though we don't have audio of that, it's very clear Bruce Lee got it. He's saying the traditional martial arts have to pull their hand all the way back here in order to punch with power. We can do it if our hand is just here and go from there. So it's very clear that even when Bruce Lee was doing that demonstration, he was doing it in a way that said the classical idea, your hand has to go back in order to punch. But if you know how to use your power, you can do it without pulling back and without having to, and with your arm being able to stay in front of you. So Bruce Lee definitely got it.
All right.
But people who watch the demonstration don't, because they don't know the context. All right. And think about it. In the 60s, it was all karate. It was all chambering your hand back there. So this young Chinese master comes and shows, like, I can just leave my hand there and punch you. That was like, whoa. But that was a demonstration of, I can do this thing. You guys can't do it. This is not a technique. This is a way of transferring power. So that thing must be understood. Now, the second half of all of this is that Bruce Lee did not do the inch punch the way we do it in Wing Chun.
Okay.
But I had to start this whole thing off with what he's demonstrating is not what a lot of people think it is, all right? It's just long bridge power. The second half is the way he demonstrates it is not at all the way we normally do it in Wing Chun. And that is not to say Bruce Lee is wrong, and that's not to say that that's some kind of incorrect way of demonstrating it, all right? Remember that Bruce Lee came to the States with maybe 3 years of Wing Chun training tops, okay? And this is 3 years of Wing Chun training while he was a teenager, all right? So although he was scrappy and had a boxing match with Gary Elms and fights on the rooftops and all this kind of stuff there, he still, even if he was really quite good and adept at Wing Chun, he physically didn't even have that much time. He didn't have enough time in it to internalize it in a way that someone who had been doing it for 15, 20, 30 years would have, right?
All right.
Even if they were not as good as Bruce Lee. There's just like this certain things about martial arts skills that need to age like wine. And it doesn't matter how good you are physically. There's just a certain level of experience and understanding and introspection that you cannot force feed into a teenager's head in 3 years, all right? So according to James DeMille, and I know that in some circles, James DeMille is not always the most reliable narrator, all right? James DeMille wrote that famous book on the 1 and 3 inch punch, which I actually gave you a copy of, signed by James DeMille. You have 2 copies now, right? Signed by James DeMille. And that was one of the very early books that I owned, because when I was in Seattle, the Wing Chun style I was taking was from the James DeMille line.
And the other one I have is signed by James DeMille.
DeMille, yes, of course. So in it, James DeMille very clearly shows how to do the inch punch. It's not exactly the way Bruce did it in his demonstrations. James DeMille did it off of the opposite side hand. So, for example, you have the right leg forward, you punch with the left. So you're doing the kind of more crossbody style, whereas Bruce Lee did the same side hand to the leg that was forward, right? And James DeMille addresses that in the book, right? They also call it a floating punch, all right? Floating punch is also a term from Chinese martial arts as well, and that's probably a topic for another day, right? Because the way the wrist floats and the elbow drops when you do it, it's like they call it suspended force, like your wrist is suspended by a string and your elbow's just kind of hanging and then it just extends, right? So it's sometimes called the floating punch, sometimes called the suspended power, whatever. There's lots of names for it, right? Which again is why it's so easy for old Chinese sifus to tell you're wrong. Call it long bridge power. They say, no, it's called floating power. Called floating power. They say, no, it's suspended bridge force or whatever. So, I mean, they
got all the tricks up those sleeves.
At some point, if you've been to Hong Kong enough and had enough conversations with Chinese Kung Fu masters, just know it's better to just learn the art of nodding and smiling and going, right, right. Okay. And if they tell you something you already know, you always say, wow, that's super interesting. So anyway. It's pretty clear that Bruce was most likely heavily influenced by Jack Dempsey's book, Championship Fighting. All right. And in that book, which came out in the early 50s, Jack Dempsey talks about the power line being through the bottom 3 knuckles, aiming with the ring finger knuckle, using the vertical fist. So there's a lot of things that are like, he talks about how the idea of the power line, which goes straight through your forearm, out the ring finger knuckle. So you're by using the bottom 3 knuckles, your wrist is in perfect alignment through the forearm. Whereas if you bend it to use the top 2, those knuckles might be quote unquote stronger, but your wrist is not in great alignment for punching this way here, right?
Sucks.
So this puts you in a much better alignment for full power transfer through the arm, right? And it was funny because years ago, GSP was on the Joe Rogan podcast, but this is like a very long time ago. And Joe Rogan was like, yeah, you have to hit with like the top 2 knuckles or whatever. And GSP was like, no. You have to hit with the bottom 3 knuckles. This whole thing right here. It was just so funny because like Joe Rogan is often the bro who knows everything. And he was like, yeah, well, you got to hit with these 2. And like GSP is like, no, you got to hit with the bottom 3. That was totally badass, right? So
trust me, I know.
Yeah. So anyway, which one are you going to listen to? So Jack Dempsey wrote this book, which was called Championship Fighting. And it was about using the art of boxing for self-defense. Essentially how to create a really powerful hammer-like punch where you could use your entire body weight into the strike. So he had this idea called the falling step, where essentially you have weight on your front leg in a way where, like, if your all your weight, let's say, for example, this is a very rudimentary example. There are many different ways of doing it. But let's say you have all of your weight on your front leg. And then your other leg, you're on your toe in kind of an offset stance. Mm-hmm. So since all of your weight is on the front leg, if you were to lift your front leg off the ground, you would naturally fall forward because all your weight is on that leg. Almost like you would stumble forward by lifting your own leg because it's bearing all the weight, right? So what he's essentially doing is he's saying you have to harness that controlled fall to put your body weight into the punch. So by standing with you can start in a very narrow stance. You have just a little offset. Let's say your right foot is slightly ahead of your left foot, and you're on 2 tracks. You put all your weight on your right leg, and then if you try to lift your right leg off the floor, you would naturally stumble forward. And since you're on the toe of your left leg, your brain, in order to keep you from falling on your face, would naturally push off the toe. So what ends up happening is like it's a controlled fall as you go forward, and then your front foot slams into the ground again with all of your body weight. So the idea is to learn this trick where you basically harness your body weight dropping into the floor and then transfer that into your punch. And it's not, and he says even Jack Dempsey admitted when you start learning it at first, it's very clunky because it's not about throwing a jab with your front hand. It's about a straight power punch with your lead hand. And so you drop your entire body weight behind it. And he's like, at first, it's gonna sound a little clunky. Your foot's gonna stamp on the floor every time you do it, and it's gonna sound awkward. But as you get better at it, obviously it'll be smoother, and then you are now delivering a powerful right straight or left straight, and you can even then use it for your rear leg. From what I understand, from what I learned from my teachers in Seattle at that time, and again, you always have to be careful with these things because everything about Bruce Lee at this point, if it's not on video, it's all hearsay. Okay, so that's the problem. And when people say, no, well, actually, so-and-so said this, okay, you can find any student of Bruce Lee at this point that said anything. And you can find any 2 students of Bruce Lee that at any point contradicted each other. So you can't say, well, I think James DeMile's a swell guy, and he said this, so it must be true. And the other guy said, well, Dan Inosanto said this, and I think he's a swell guy, so it must be this. And the other was like, well, Ted Wong. I mean, so at some point, you have to take everything you say about Bruce Lee with a grain of salt, including literally everything that comes out of my mouth, okay? So, I say that because it's just so easy for people to just be like, no, this is the way it was. Like, how do you freaking know? You never even met Bruce Lee. It's like, shut up with what you know, okay?
Oh,
so,
yeah.
From what I understood, James DeMille gave the impression that Bruce Lee learned this falling step by reading Championship Fighting and then melded it with the Wing Chun idea. So when you look at Bruce Lee's inch punch demonstration, it's not like normally in Wing Chun, when we want to demonstrate long bridge power, we don't need to stand in any particular stance. I can stand in the frontal stance, like the one we use in the Siunum Tau form. I can stand with my weight on the back leg. I can stand with my weight on the front leg. I can stand like I'm just sitting there chilling. I can stand on one leg. It doesn't matter.
You can sit down and chilling.
You could, all right? All I'm going to do is just put my hand on you, and then from there, boom, generate this short force that will give you a jolt, all right? And you should be able to do it from any position, any stance, because you're not going to be in an optimized position when you're fighting. You should actually practice striking out of compromised positions, not just out of these positions where you're standing correctly or perfectly. So when you watch Bruce Lee's inch punch demonstration, especially the one where we have the better footage of, which I think was the second Long Beach one, he's standing sideways, all right, which is already not typical for Wing Chun. He has the weight on the front leg and the heel is up on the rear. And then when he does that punch, you see it's a short, controlled fall onto the front leg. That is not the Wing Chun inch punch. That is Jack Dempsey's falling step done at short distance. When Jack Dempsey taught the falling step in his book, he doesn't teach it as an inch punch. He teaches it as a punch from your boxing guard. Ooh. So it's incredibly powerful because it's coming all the way from here with that waist and that body weight drop and everything. All Bruce Lee did was compress Jack Dempsey's falling step into that short distance.
He made a merger.
He made a merge, all right? Wow. And perhaps using kind of a fencing starting point instead of a Wing Chun starting point with Jack Dempsey. So it's like when I see Bruce Lee's inch punch, I see kind of a fencing starting position. Yeah. I see Jack Dempsey's body weight drop mechanics, and I see Wing Chun wrist mechanics on the punch. So it's Wing Chun, fencing, and Jack Dempsey's falling
guy's
step.
like a kung fu genius.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I see. I don't see a Wing Chun inch punch. I don't see a Jeet Kune Do inch punch. I see an amalgamation of 3 different sources. Okay. Wing Chun joint mechanics, Jack Dempsey's body weight drop, and a fencing starting position. That's it. All right, and that's what I see when I see, and people go like, how come I don't see other Wing Chun people doing that? Because that thing Bruce Lee created. When you do a proper inch punch or long bridge demonstration in Wing Chun, it normally doesn't have as much power as what Bruce Lee does because we don't lunge our body weight into it necessarily. I know that different Wing Chun sifus do it differently. The idea is that no matter where you are, you should be able to hit your partner with enough power to stun them or stop them. If you want to optimize it for more power, then of course you can change it. But what you're looking at is not a pure long bridge punch demonstration. You're looking at Bruce Lee optimizing that demonstration by adding the body weight drop and the side on position. All right. And that is actually not that difficult to teach. But that would essentially just be teaching something for demonstration, as opposed to learning in combat context how to transfer long bridge power. That's important, all right? When you're doing chi sao, when your arms are ahead of you, how do you transfer long bridge power into your partner to launch them with palms, punches, jolt them into jutsaos, toss them to the side? That is the application of long bridge power. What Bruce Lee did is optimize the demonstration of it. Wow, dude. So, next question.
Man, well, I've gotten it all wrong this whole time, so...
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's not surprising.
And again, that's just my speculation. Right?
Okay.
I'm sure that everyone in the comments will educate me on what an idiot I am.
Yeah. All right.
There was some guy who said, well, isn't the inch punch like him like channeling all of his prana and chi? It's like, have you ever read anything Bruce Lee wrote? Like, does he, at what point did Bruce Lee give the impression that he's trying to sell mystical forces in his punch demonstrations? It's like people just, they want to see it. They want to see the mystical, and they just tack that thing onto anything they want and say, see, this is obviously a demonstration.
Prana power.
This is obviously confirmation bias.
Oh, yes. All right, now, let's move along. Next up, we got Chris.
Okay, just Chris.
Just Chris.
All right.
All right.
Chris Brown? Or
No.
Okay.
No.
Why do you always
Chris Rock?
immediately go to Chris Brown?
Huh?
Chris Brown, Chris Rock. It's all about violence with you.
I am the Kung Fu genius. All right. I do a podcast with 2 super irritating people. So the fact that I'm always a little bit on edge.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Someone who can't pronounce T's and someone who can't pronounce names.
Yeah.
All right. He's lucky he got Chris as that one there. Can you imagine?
So simple.
Yeah.
So simple. Yeah. I could not botch that
James DeMille.
I tried to.
God.
I tried to make it Christ.
All right, let's do it.
All right. So Chris is asking, great to hear your thoughts on Jean LaBelle.
Okay, I'll take
Question for a future episode.
All right, so not this episode, a future episode.
No, a future one.
Okay, got it.
Not this one.
Not this one.
What are your thoughts on Roberto Duran's sticky hands in fighting, boxing style, and drills in comparison to Wing Chun's trapping?
Yeah, there's a video there on YouTube.
I've seen the video.
Yeah, where he's just kind of sticking.
Recently,
and
I've seen it.
No,
That
I mean,
shit is
look,
fire.
say what you want about Wing Chun.
I've
especially
seen
for,
that somewhere else too.
for people. What do you mean?
I've seen someone else do it, and his name would be
Lomachenko, yeah. Well, I mean, like, look, Wing Chun gets a lot of shit from the general martial arts world because of idiots like Ding Hao and all of these morons who have no ring fighting experience and decide to go in and fight with semi-professional mixed martial artists, or they step out of their wheelhouse of like, okay, this is a self-defense style, and they decide, no, this is a ring fighting style, and having no ring fighting experience, I'm going to jump in the ring with a trained killer, right?
Directly out there, lane.
And then you have, some kind of embarrassing demonstrations of this, and people have some weird perceptions of Wing Chun. And on top of that, I mean, majority of the Wing Chun out there is I don't know about. I look at a lot of Wing Chun and I go, I'd rather watch boxing videos than most of the Wing Chun videos out there, right? All the Wing Chun stuff shows up on my feed on IG because obviously I do Wing Chun and that stuff shows up. But I mean, like I find myself just scrolling through that stuff really quickly because I find it's either very uninteresting or, I don't know. I look at that and I go, ugh, whatever. So,
Cringe.
So anyway, yeah, I mean, Roberto Duran, he has this kind of idea of sticking and clinging and stuff, and you see that among other boxers. And, when you see high-level fighters and maybe it sounds like confirmation bias coming from my point, but I can definitely see Wing Chun ideas done by certain fighters, and sometimes I think that those professional fighters sometimes have a better idea or a better way of applying that because they have done it under stress and they practiced it under, in competition. And I think those are the lessons that better Wing Chun people can look at and go like, okay, well, watch that video of Roberto Duran kind of sticking and get an idea about how you could apply your Wing Chun against, a high-level boxer, for example, right? Or you look at Lomachenko's footwork, which he moves to the outside, and his footwork is very much like what we are trying to do at the higher levels of Wing Chun, especially in Zhong, taking angles on the side. And look at how someone can apply that at a super high level, right?
The art.
Yeah. And
the beauty.
And I think that's what people need to look at instead of going, ooh, boxing is not Wing Chun. Dude, it's all 2 hands and 2 feet, man. Yeah. All right. You have to look at this stuff as movement. All right. And you have to turn yourself into a movement junkie. And look at how people move and what are the patterns that you see that reoccur among successful fighters and mistakes that you should avoid, because now with YouTube and with all this social media stuff, you have access to watching all sorts of stuff. You can watch, older fighters. You can, and there's great channels out there where people analyze this stuff. And in mixed martial arts, you have like that guy, the Weasel, who some MMA guys don't like him, but I think he's pretty good at breaking down fighters and strengths and things like that. And there's also Jack Slack.
The Weasel. I've never heard of the Weasel.
Jack Slack. He's one of this guy's.
Oh, get out of here!
Yeah, Jack Slack has
from his hood.
Yeah, Jack Slack is an MMA podcast, and he'll do breakdowns and not really so much predictions. He's very technical. His breakdowns of boxing and jiu-jitsu and MMA and from a technical side is really interesting. And I find that when I'm working out, I'll listen to Jack Slack break down fighters and how they match up because he does it in a very analytical way. And I learn a lot about fighting through listening to podcasts like that. And I find them much more interesting than, what some Wing Chun people say. Also, what I find disappointing is there are very few Wing Chun people out there saying anything. There's a Wing Chun people just either demonstrate some drills or some forms, but I don't find a lot of interesting discussion coming from Wing Chun people these days. And I wish they would talk more and have some more interesting conversations. So that maybe I don't only have to listen to Jack Slack. Because right now, I mean, the only other Wing Chun person out there that I listen to in terms of like what he has to say and break down is Mark Phillips. Like he's the only one. We've had him on this podcast because of his background and his degree and his specialization in self-defense and violence. What he says is super interesting, and I really value his opinion. But I don't find a lot of other Wing Chun people out there that are saying anything interesting. They're just trying to sell their school and their lineage. They're not having any conversations about anything. So,
all right.
Yeah. That's all I got to say about that topic. Hey, Kung Fu Genius listeners, if you're looking for an easy way to support this podcast, please consider joining the Kung Fu Genius Patreon. You can support for as little as $5 a month and get access to episodes a few days early. Higher levels of support get additional goodies, exclusive content, and even your name in the description. The baller level of support will give you the opportunity to be a Dre for a day and give me a rest from this guy over here. A link for the Kung Fu Genius Patreon page is in the description below. You can also support us by subscribing to the Kung Fu Genius on YouTube, liking this video, and sharing it on your social media platforms. When you subscribe on YouTube, don't forget to hit that bell for notifications so you will know as soon as a new episode or a premiere is available for you to watch. For those of us who listen to us on audio, it's a huge help if you don't just rate the podcast, but also write a review wherever you listen to the Kung Fu Genius, such as Apple or Google Podcasts. I really appreciate it. And now back to me.
Okay, good stuff, man. Next up, we got one of the awesome Three Stooges.
Shemp.
Mo Howard.
Mo Howard.
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
The
Mo
main
Howard.
one.
The main dude.
Right.
Yeah. The questions for a future episode. Not this one.
Okay, not this one either.
Hello, KFG, Dre, and Andrew.
He knows Andrew.
I just read. I didn't even notice.
You know,
that.
I think all you guys are getting more famous than me. You know what? I have a feeling I could just peace out. You guys can do this without
Yeah, but
me.
why
What do
did
you
he
think?
leave Mikey out? That's interesting. He left Mikey out. Hello, KFG,
Who's,
Dre, and
who's
Andrew.
Mikey?
I mean, I didn't even edit this.
Oh, okay.
On the documentary Bruce Lee, the Legend, there is a segment on Bruce learning a style of Kung Fu, Siu Hung Sung. To paraphrase, Siu stated that Bruce mastered his forms in just 3 days, where it takes most people weeks to just learn the basic forms. What style was that Kung Fu called? How well do you think it works in self-defense? And do you think Bruce kept up with it or discarded it later on? Thank you.
This is a great question because I feel that Siu Hon Sang's influence on Bruce Lee is extremely underrated, especially among the Fuk Young cultists who think that Fuk Young is the guy who taught Bruce Lee all of this stuff, right? And so,
You gotta love Fuk Young.
according to the late Hawkins Chung, shortly before Bruce Lee departed for the U.S., so when he was 18, he mentioned to Hawkins Chung, he goes, "Oh, when I go to the States, I want to teach Kung Fu." And Hawkins kind of laughed at him because he's like, "You don't even know that much Wing Chun, right?" Because in Hong Kong, you know, I think
That's
what
the
people,
Siheng,
right? I assume Hawkins was his Siheng. I don't know if Bruce was a Siheng or Hawkins was a Siheng. Let's just say Hawkins was a Siheng.
Yeah.
And they both went to St. Francis Xavier together. And in fact, there's some class group photos where you see Bruce Lee and Hawkins Chung in the same photo. And Hawkins Chung was a training partner to Bruce Lee and friend, and I believe they also exchanged a letter or two. And Hawkins Chung later went to Los Angeles, and he even got a black belt in karate and also taught Tai Chi. Hawkins Chung was great. I mean, Hawkins Chung was very dynamic and from that old school period.
Love
and
his mustache, too.
Yeah, it just, I mean,
His style.
I really wish I had. I only met Hawkins once in Germany when he came for the EWTO's 25th anniversary celebration, and Hawkins was there. And I say he demonstrated a Tai Chi form, and then he told some stories about Grandmaster Yip Man. And his accent was a little bit difficult for Germans to understand because he had a very thick Chinese accent. And I remember being there, and my Siheng Oliver Koenig, who's now a grandmaster level in the EWTO, he had to do the translation for Hawkins.
Yeah.
And my Siheng Oliver Koenig, he speaks English very well, but Hawkins Chung's English is you have to imagine if you're a German or an Austrian that speaks English as a second language. And now you have to decipher the English of someone with a very heavy Chinese accent. This is very difficult, right? It's very difficult for most people because you are now trying to decipher an accent in your non-native language, right? So I remember like my Siheng Oliver was struggling a little bit. Like Hawkins would say something, and then he would Siheng Oliver would translate it into German, and then I, of course, I grew up. Chinglish is one of the languages that I speak.
All right.
And I'm fluent in it. And my greatest joy is when Chinese people cannot understand other Chinese people in English. And then they turn to me and they go, what did he just say? And I'm the one translating the Chinglish to other Chinese people, right?
Great.
So, but anyway, so he told some stories and that was all super interesting. And then, I got a photo with him, but for the life of me, I cannot find it. I have to, it's an actual physical photo. I got to look for it somewhere. But I really wish I had gotten the chance to spend more time with him. Sifu Carson.
Shoot the shit with him.
Sifu Carson Lau.
Yeah.
Was one of my main mentors. He spent some time with Hawkins Chung, and the two of them were quite close. And I know it was rough for him when Hawkins passed away. And so, so anyway, Hawkins said in an interview that shortly before Bruce departed for the U.S., he said he was going to teach Wing Chun. And Hawkins kind of made fun of him because, I mean, I know this is shocking for legions of Bruce Lee fans, but Bruce Lee was not considered a qualified Wing Chun instructor at the time he left Hong Kong. So it would be like someone who's just kind of like somewhere in the Chum Q level going like, yeah, I'm going to move to Mexico and start teaching Wing Chun or something like that, right? And you'd be like, all right, you might want to learn more, right? And then so I think Hawkins had made some kind of joke or reference about Bruce not knowing that much. And Bruce got the idea that, maybe I should go learn some other fancy kung fu. Because then he had the idea that, Wing Chun is not really good for demonstrations because our forms are, the Siu Tao as a demonstration is basically a sleeping pill in performance art. All right, you want to put an audience to sleep, do the Siu Tao. Like how many times I watch a Wing Chun demonstration, they go, okay, Sifu students, they come out now, they're going to demonstrate the Siu Tao form, and it's just like, I get it, Siu Tao is super important, but why would you demonstrate that in a public demonstration? At least do the Chum Kyu or something like that, right?
Yeah.
At least there's movements
Move around,
and kicks or something, right? But anyway, so Bruce went to Xiu Hon Sang. Xiu Hon Sang was, from what I understand, a family friend of at least of Bruce Lee's father, because remember Bruce Lee's father was an actor, and Xiu Hon Sang was also an actor. Uncle Xiu, as he was affectionately called. And Uncle Xiu, from what I understood or from what I recall, was a graduate of the Jingwu Academy in Hong Kong, or Jingmo in Cantonese. And the Jingwu Academy is the same academy that the movie Fist of Fury is about.
Yeah.
All right? Like with the Fok Yun Gap, the head who was killed by the Japanese or whatever. He was the person who established it, according to folklore, right? There are many people that believe Fok Yun Gap or Ho Yuan Jia in Mandarin was just a fairy tale character. He's not even real. Siva Leung Ting just believes that he was just a coolie in the kitchen that they took a photo of and put his photo up there as a figurehead. Because the actual guys who opened the Jingwu Academy were two Shanghainese businessmen. And it was, for all intents and purposes, the first commercial kung fu school. And it was opened in Shanghai in 1914 or 1920. It was around that time, very, very early on. And then they opened it as a taiyuwui, as a physical culture place, because
like a YMCA.
Yeah, like a YMCA. So you could go there. I believe they even had boarding for people to live there. You could learn martial arts. You could learn things like archery. You could even learn things like Western bodybuilding, which was like which was like very foreign for Chinese at that time. But like Western style bodybuilding was like a big thing, right? Wow. So it was like a place where you can go and do all those things. And then what they did on the martial arts end is, in the original Shanghai Jingwu Academy, they invited masters of different styles. So you had like Lo Guangyu from Northern Mantis, or they had like an Eagle Claw master, Lao Fat Mang, all these different famous masters of different styles. And then they developed a curriculum where I believe it's like 10 forms that you have to learn first. And these are called like the Jingwu 10 or the Jingwu Basic 10. And these are things like Tam Toi, like springing leg and Gong Lik Kun and all of these forms. And they are, for lack of a better phrase, generic kung fu forms. So they have like, you have to learn these basic forms, and these forms have different stances and kicks, and they have different levels of difficulty. And there's one even called Jeet Kun, all right? Although the Jeet is for section, not for interception, but it sounds almost identical to Jeet Kun though. And so you learn these basic 10 forms. I believe there's even some weapons forms in there. And once you learn those 10, I believe it's 10, I could be wrong, then you specialize in a style after that. So like after you learn these 10 fundamental kung fu forms, then you might go and learn Northern Praying Mantis. Or after you learn these 10 kung fu forms, you might go and learn Eagle Claw or something like that. So that meant that lot of Northern Mantis guys and Eagle Claw guys, they actually have the same fundamental 10 forms because it comes from the Jingwu Academy. And those forms have nothing to do with either Mantis or Eagle Claw. So when you look at like Lily Lau's Eagle Claw curriculum, like the first 10 forms are like these generic Kung Fu forms that you also have in some Northern Mantis styles. And that's because those styles were kind of pushed through the filter of the Jingwu Academy at some point. And the Jingwu Academy started opening branches throughout Asia. So the first one was in Shanghai. They opened one in Hong Kong, and then I believe there was one in Singapore and a few other locations.
Nice.
And the template was the same, right? You would learn these 10 forms, and then you would specialize, and they would invite masters from different styles. And that is part of the reason, not the entire reason, but that's part of the reason why there's so many Northern Kung Fu schools in Hong Kong. Because Hong Kong is in southern China, so you would expect there only be southern styles in Hong Kong. But you have Northern Mantis and Eagle Claw and these northern styles in Hong Kong, partially because there was a Jingwu Academy there where you had these northern masters come in. And Xu Honsang was a product of the Jingwu Academy, as was his classmate, Sekin, Han from Enter the Dragon.
Yeah.
So Xu Honsang and Sekin are like from the same generation. So when you imagine Xu Honsang, who also passed away quite a long time ago, about the same age as Han, all right? Like, and same generation. He's like that guy. So he was an avuncular character in Bruce Lee's life. And Bruce, before departing for the U.S., wanted to learn some Kung Fu. So it might not sound like I'm putting Bruce Lee in a good light, but this is very Chinese way of thinking. He wanted to learn some fancy shit to impress the Westerners.
All right.
Okay? Because he wasn't going to impress anyone with the Siunum Tao form, right? So he went to Uncle Siu, and I believe the exchange was like Uncle Siu was going to teach him some of those basic Jingwu forms, and Bruce was going to teach him some cha-cha steps in exchange. Okay?
Bruce was nasty.
And don't forget that Xu Honsang was also an actor, right? So that's how they knew each other, because I believe he had acted in films with his father, and he also acted in films with Sekin. In fact, in 1972, before Bruce did Enter the Dragon, there's a photo of Bruce Lee at a restaurant in Hong Kong. He's already a movie star at this point, but he had not done Enter the Dragon yet. And Bruce is like in his super swanky 70s style, and he's sitting at a restaurant, and at the table with him is Sekin, Han from Enter the Dragon, and Uncle Xu Honsang. So like he still kept in touch with those guys, right? So Xu Honsang taught him supposedly like 3 of these forms, right? I believe one of the forms were actually called Jit Kun. All right. But again, it's not the same as Jit Kun, though. It's a different character, similar or identical pronunciation. Jit means dissection. I think he also learned Gong Lit Kun and so on. But he also picked up some crane movements and mantis movements and things like that. So when you see Bruce Lee do his famous screen test, where he goes like, this is a crane form, and then he busts that thing out.
Yeah.
Or he does that famous thing where he jumps and then he does the second jump kick. Or he'll do these different kind of like kung fu forms. That's all the stuff he learned from Uncle Siu. The Fuk Yang people try to pretend like he learned all that stuff from Fuk Yang later, all right? Whereas maybe Fuk Yang taught him some operatic stuff or taught him this and that, but exactly what Fuk Yang taught him is up. There's a lot of debate about it, and a lot of the Fuk Yang cultists out there are going to have you believe that Fuk Yang taught him this real red boat Wing Chun, which somehow Bruce Lee never ended up integrating into his Jeet Kune Do. So how good was it? Or he taught him Mantis and all this other kind of stuff, and Bruce ended up not really using it. So it's like they want to say he taught him all this great stuff, and it's like, well, how come that stuff never made it into the core curriculum of Jeet Kune Do, right? Damn. And then they're like, yeah, you know, when he's doing this and this form and that form, that's from Fuk Yang. No, it's not. It's from Xu Honsang. And they're kind of shitting on someone who is extremely important, and we also have evidence of him having learned from him. I mean, yeah, we know he knows Fuk Yang, and Jesse Glover talked about it, but like Hawkins Chung makes reference to Bruce going to Xu Honsang, and Hawkins Chung came with Bruce Lee to some of those sessions with Xu Honsang, but then dropped out because he really didn't have any interest in learning that stuff. And that's where Bruce picked up those things. So I don't remember, I probably have it written somewhere, the exact forms that Bruce Lee learned. But when you see Bruce Lee busting kung fu shapes in those demonstrations where he's doing the jump kicks and showing the other styles, that's stuff he learned from Xu Honsang. And I believe, and this is totally my speculation, when Bruce went to Oakland later, and you know he eventually had his tussle with Wong Jack Man.
Yeah.
Bruce gave a demonstration.
Jerry curl.
Yeah, exactly. Bruce gave a demonstration in San Francisco, and it angered a lot of the Chinese martial arts community because he basically said, like, all this fancy kung fu shit you're doing is bullshit. And, you know, you need, like, you need to do something that's more direct and effective, right? And according to some of the witness accounts of that, Bruce busts out a form. And the audience sees it and they're like, wow, this form looks really good. And then he goes on the mic and he's like, that's a bunch of bullshit what I just did there. and I believe the reason why that might have angered people, particularly in that audience, is because Wong Jack Man was from the Jingwu school.
Yeah.
And Bruce Lee learned Jingwu forms.
Yeah.
So if Bruce Lee demonstrated a form in front of an audience, it would have been a Jingwu form. So that would mean that he, in particular, demonstrated a form that those guys were doing, and Bruce probably did a pretty good job of it and then said it was bullshit. Like, can you imagine if someone goes up to the wooden dummy and does a pitch perfect first 4 sets, no mistakes, clean angle, footwork, everything like this, and go, that's a bunch of horse shit, right? You'd be like, what? He's like, because it's basically saying, like, I don't believe in that. That's a bunch of crap, but I can still do it better than you. It is like the biggest F you, all right? And so I always speculated that that might have been one of the reasons why those guys got particularly salty, because it's possible, and of course this is just my speculation. I don't know what Bruce Lee actually demonstrated or what snippet of a form he did. Or maybe he demonstrated it poorly in their taste and also got pissed off or whatever. Yeah. But it was most likely a Jingwu form, and Wong Jack Man was a Jingwu guy, all right? And Jingwu guys do mostly forms, which is why I think that Wong Jack Man was a fighter, having come from a mostly forms-based martial arts style. I have a very difficult time believing that. So anyway, that's that. That's Uncle Chiu.
Okay. Next up, we got a question from Power Play for Real.
Because Power Play for Fake was already taken.
Already taken. Yeah, I'm sure he wanted that one. And he had to go with For Real.
Right.
Okay. So... Hey, KFG.
That's what's up.
It is well believed
that
Bruce Lee seriously liked men's fashion and enjoyed dapper. And enjoyed getting dapper. Oops.
Yes.
In one of your up-and-coming podcasts, can you tell us what, if any, you may know or heard about his GQ style? Peace, brother KFG.
Well, I don't know. Bruce Lee's fashion sense is a topic of debate because there's some people like. Well, sometimes I mean he was dressed very dapperly. I don't know. Can you say dapperly? I don't know. I'm gonna say dapperly. All right. He was dressed very dapperly from time to time, but then like there's also him wearing like that plaid green jacket, like with like. There was some questionable choice.
I would love to have that jacket.
Yeah, but then you also go, okay, it was also the early 70s, you know? But then, like, Bruce was also wearing, like, in the 60s, like this, he's wearing, like, a daishiki, like a long-ass daishiki. And then you
remember that shit.
Okay, but it was the 60s. So, I mean, the problem is when people, like, throw shade on some of Bruce Lee's fashion sense, it's like, dude, it was the 60s and 70s. Everyone was dressing like that, right? So I think that he was very hip to how he should dress. Also, Doug Palmer, who wrote the book about his time with Bruce Lee. He traveled with Bruce Lee to Hong Kong in the early 60s. So this is still Bruce Lee years before he would become a movie star. It was even a few years before he did Green Hornet. And Doug Palmer, one of his Seattle students, had the chance to travel with Bruce Lee to Hong Kong. And he even mentions in that book how Bruce was very fashion conscious. And this is before Bruce was like even Green Hornet Bruce. And like when it came to meeting girls in Hong Kong or when it came to meeting his family, he was like telling Doug like you should have a suit, you should dress like this, and he was, you know, very big on what he would wear and what Doug would wear and all that kind of stuff. And I remember I mentioned that to my wife, and she was like, because when I was reading it, I'm like, look at these letters that Bruce was sending in the 60s, like to Doug, and he is you know, he's talking about what jacket to wear and all this kind of fashion stuff or whatever. And she's like, oh God, he's so vain. Right. And, that's probably true. I mean, look, like because we're Bruce Lee fans or whatever, we can also admit, you know, that, you know, he had some characteristics that, you know, that are not always good because we all have that kind of stuff. I mean, who isn't a little bit narcissistic? Who isn't a little bit vain about how they look? Who isn't a little bit
Not me.
image conscious. You're totally, dude. You know, I know how much time you spend on your facial hair. All right, it's like an hour a day. All right, yes. So come on, man. All right,
hour a day.
Everyone has a little bit of it, right? But it's just so like if someone happens to be a celebrity or someone happens to be beloved, it's like either people want to say all those things like, oh, this person was just a narcissist or whatever, because they just want to break someone down, or they want to pretend like this person had no personality or character flaws or whatever. And you know, I don't know. How much of a flaw is it to want to dress well? Okay. I mean, should it affect how you judge people, or should it affect how your relationships with people? I don't think so. But I mean, if you want to wear your hair a certain way, you want to wear certain clothes or whatever, I mean, like, there are way worse personality traits you can have than that. All right. Yeah. So I think Bruce was, you know, very, very aware of that. Even if people think that some of the stuff he wore was kind of ridiculous. It was the 70s. If we were his age in that time period, I guarantee you there would be some embarrassing ass photos of us. Exactly.
Right.
All right. Dude, I was a skateboarder in the 90s. Yeah. Okay. I used to wear like double XL pants and baggy pants because that's what skateboarders did. And we used to cut them at the bottom. Then they were like frayed at the bottom with these huge pants and these big dopey shirts and big stupid hats and stuff like that. I mean, back then I thought it was the coolest freaking dude in the world. I look like a fucking clown when I look at those photos, right? So, I mean, like, what was my fashion? I was trying to fit into a certain group or whatever. And for that group, that was fine and right and the way you should dress. But yeah, 30 years later... All right, you go, Jesus Christ, okay? But you have to look at it for the time, all right?
Okay.
All right, next question. Hey, by the way, do we have any non-Bruce Lee questions this episode?
I think we do.
Okay.
Next one is along that route.
All right.
Switching gears on
Okay. All right. What about Brandon Lee?
That's coming up.
Right.
Next up, we got Carlos Estrella.
All right. The star.
Okay. If they can have IP Man spelled with the I,
Yes.
P, like PP.
I get it.
IP Man visiting San Francisco, why can't we have a Tang Song movie where he's living in NYC Chinatown?
I would love to have a Tang Song movie, all right? If I was if I had any talent for writing stories, which I don't, all right?
He's good at telling them.
Well, I can tell stories, yes. But it's easy because these stories happen to me, and I'm just saying what happened. You know, I can write books about kung fu because that's what I do. But like, if I had to like put pen to paper and like construct a 3-act story with like characters and character development and conflict and resolution and stuff like that, I don't know if anyone would actually want to watch that. But if I had screenwriting ability, I would write a story about Tang Song, and I would try to get it produced in Hong Kong. I even know the actor I would want to play Tang Song.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's what's up.
So I don't know if anyone can write a screenplay and has done it before, not just like in your head. All right, I got ideas.
I have a friend who can write screenplays.
I have a few in my head.
She's not kung fu related, but she is.
That's fine. No, because stories and writing a good story is all about, you have to follow like a template, you know what I mean? And how you build it up and your main characters, and the audience has to know about them within 8 minutes of the story.
Yeah, my scripts don't follow that template at all.
Yeah, I know.
So I wouldn't qualify. What?
Yeah.
You have scripts?
In my head.
Yes.
In your head.
In my head.
So, yeah, if there's someone out there who has experience with this and is interested, I would love
chime in.
I think there's a very good story with Tang Song there. Yeah. I mean, I actually have a story in my head.
Ooh.
But I just don't know how to write it. It's not my wheelhouse. I don't know, and which is funny
because put it in a screenplay.
Because in New York, everyone is a screenwriter, everyone's a director, everyone's an actor or whatever, right?
Right.
And I'm the only one that's like, no, I'm not any of those things, all right? And I recognize I'm not any of those things. I'm not going to pretend I'm any of those things. So anyway.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go forward to Fab Myers.
Fab Myers.
He's the brother of Oscar.
Oscar Myers.
Yes.
I don't know why that's so much. That's
Everyone's
ridiculous.
brother is chiming in today.
Yeah,
I love it.
British guy likes it.
If you get a British guy laughing,
Michael Myers.
you got the room.
Yeah.
Michael Myers too, right, cousin? Hi, KFG and the team.
That's what's up.
He's including Mike in that one.
Kinda.
Well, he
I'll
made
take
it.
Yeah.
He made it.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
He really just met Andrew and you.
Being completely and utterly ignored by Mo Howard.
Right.
I love it.
Who I've, by the way, who I've actually chatted with in the live chat.
Yeah.
So it's not like I think he's just
Getting dissed by Mo Howard, man.
me.
All right.
Me.
He gave you this one right on the head, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Boom, right on the head this way here. We literally just alienated 80% of our audience with that right there. Right? Anyone even knows what the Three Stooges are, all right?
They will learn somehow. Hi, KFG and the team. I really enjoy your show.
Me too.
My wife, who has zero interest in Kung Fu, loves watching it too and always enjoys a good Dyson question.
Oh, is there such thing?
That's a bit of an
What's a good Dyson question?
I couldn't tell. I think he asked a good one last episode that hasn't aired yet.
Maybe.
We'll see what his wife thinks.
Yeah.
Anyway, do you have any little herd stories regarding Chun Wai-man you could share?
Oh.
As a former police officer, triad member, actor, ring fighter, etc., he's a colorful and interesting character.
Yes.
Back in the day, there was a rumor that he knew exactly what happened to Bruce regarding his death. Good job, too, on showing how full of shit that clown Beardy is. The bloke is a first-class twat.
bloke. Man,
And he
see?
said bloke and twat.
Yes.
All right.
Keep up the great work.
All right. Fantastic. All right.
Fantastic
Yes.
work.
If he uses bloke and twat in the same
the
sentence,
same
then he's
sentence.
got to be from California.
He's from...
So anyway, great. Yeah, I like that. Chun Wai-man. Well, Chun Wai-man, you're also a huge Chun Wai-man fan.
Big time.
Right?
That's
Chun
my dude.
Wai-man is a
my dude.
certified badass.
Can't wait to meet him.
And legend. Yeah, he. I know people who are friends with him. Mm-hmm. He's not really big on giving interviews, and so he was a police officer for a very short time. But he had, as a member of the triads, he didn't last. He didn't last very long in the police department.
Man.
Now he was also a.
But he wasn't a corrupt cop, from what I heard.
No, so I don't know anything about that. I just know that he wasn't a cop for very long.
Yeah.
Like he got out of
He
like
just had double lives.
he got out of police academy and he was a cop for like 6 months and then they're
Okay.
like,
Hey.
yeah, you got to go.
Yeah, no,
Like,
you're-
this isn't gonna work. So I don't think he was a corrupt cop, even though he was a triad member. And the reason why I say this is because he would have become a cop in the early 70s. And that was around the time that they formed the ICAC.
Yeah.
And had he done anything, I think he would have been caught by the ICAC. And from what I understand, he wasn't. So whatever, right? He
ICAC.
he later became like a full contact fighter, and obviously he had that famous kickboxing match with that Japanese fighter in the 80s when he was already like in his 40s.
Right.
And he knocked that dude out, right? All full of tattoos and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Such a badass.
I gotta compare tat stories with.
Yeah,
Chun
he
Wai-man.
your tattoos are similar to his in a certain way, right?
bit,
You got some
yeah.
Chun Wai-man vibes,
Yeah,
right?
unplanned. I didn't
Yeah,
even know,
yeah, you
unplanned
didn't
that
even
shit.
know. You've
No.
had those from before, right? You guys are soul brothers, right? So he did full contact fighting in the early 70s, from what I understood. And I think he obviously he had learned some boxing and kickboxing. I think he had learned some karate, but before that, he was a student of Tam Hon, who was also a friend of Leung Teng's, who taught a very, very rare style of a hard style of Chinese Kung Fu, which is also related to Japanese karate. And I know this because I have a very old yearbook from the Hong Kong Chinese Martial Arts Association, and it has a very young Chun Wai-man next to his Sifu Tam Hon. And I didn't know that he had learned from Tam Hon. Tam Hon was also the long pole king of 7 provinces or something like that, and he was a good friend of Leung Teng's, right? So Chun Wai-man has so I know some stuff about Chun Wai-man, but I'm not at liberty to say those things on the podcast, and they're not bad things. It's not like I'm holding out or whatever. It's just that in Chinese martial arts, I have a very respected circle of friends in Hong Kong who are much more senior than me and who have told me stuff, and without their permission, I wouldn't just retell certain stories. There's certain stories that are innocuous, and there's certain stories that involve different people. And so you just have to be mindful and respectful not to repeat that stuff. And that is in no way to imply that I know some Bruce Lee shit that Chun Wai-man said or something like that. It's just little things here and there. You just got to be mindful. People are still alive. You don't say those things, right? So one funny Chun Wai-man story I know is that he told Bay Logan. Bay Logan had the chance to interview Chun Wai-man a long time ago. And he told... And Chun Wai-man and Bruce Lee got along really well. And Bruce Lee had a lot of respect for Chun Wai-man, which is why it's weird because some people are like, oh, Chun Wai-man was responsible for Bruce Lee's death or whatever. And that really doesn't make any sense. The two of them were very close, and Chun Wai-man has been nothing but respectful of Bruce Lee. And then, of course, people will be like, see, that's exactly him covering up for the fact. It's like, shut up. Just shut up, all right? It doesn't make any sense because when it comes to what people, with the allure of triads and all these conspiracies and stuff, is when it comes to killing someone, there has to be a motive, all right? Who benefited from Bruce Lee's death? That's the first thing. If Bruce Lee were killed, who would be the beneficiary? That's the first thing you have to ask. And that would be the only place you could look at and be like, that person would have to. And that's not to say that he was killed, but saying if he were killed by someone else, there has to be a motive. That's why the Raymond Chow thing makes no sense. Because despite the fact that he was having issues with Raymond and stuff like that, Bruce was his golden egg.
Yeah, that's like a counter benefit.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce was the guy that was
like
making the most amount of money for him. Right. He's going to get rid of his big star after his Golden Harvest was floundering until he found Bruce Lee because he was in legal battles with Run Run Shaw because of Jimmy Wang Yu, who just passed away a few days ago. He was in this legal struggle, right? And because he was trying to acquire Jimmy Wang Yu, and Run Run Shaw was trying to make sure that Raymond Chow would not have a career and all this kind of stuff. And so he finds Bruce Lee, and this kind of makes his whole studio, right? And then he's going to kill him after 2 years. And then what? He's going to try to put Jimmy Wang Yu as the main star against Shaw Brothers? I mean, come on, man. That doesn't make any sense. There's no motive there. Chun Wai-man, all right, who is starting to get into acting at that time. He's a low-level actor. What is his motive to kill Bruce Lee? I mean, you have to have a motive. Like anytime people invoke the triads, you go, okay, who? War Sing War, 14K, all right? Which triads? All right? Like because they just say triads and they can't even name any triad groups, okay?
Yeah.
And so which ones and why? And what was the motivation and who? And then you but you could just say the triads killed him. All right, do you know how there are many groups, all of them? What's the motivation? It makes no sense. People need to shut the hell up on that stuff, right? Yeah. So Bay Logan interviewed Chun Wai-man many years ago, and Chun Wai-man doesn't give a lot of interviews. And he said that Chun Wai-man said he witnessed Bruce Lee and Bolo Yeung having an arm wrestling contest on the set of Enter the Dragon, and that Bruce Lee beat Bolo Yeung in an arm wrestling contest. So, which is amazing, right? I mean, of course, to be fair, Bolo, who was a professional bodybuilder,
okay,
but he was, if you look at Bolo's body in Enter the Dragon, he was definitely what you would say out of season. All right? Because when you look at Bolo Yeung when he's in season and he's taking all the horsey sauce,
yes,
and he's cut. I mean, Bolo Yeung was amazing. Like when there are photos of him in the early 70s competing, and his body was phenomenal. But when you look at him in Enter the Dragon, he's very fluffy. He's very soft. He's not striated. He has a high percentage of body fat.
Oh yeah, he looks kind of chubby in Enter the Dragon.
Yeah,
he looks great in Bloodsport.
Yeah,
Bloodsport,
absolutely. He's a little bit better in Bloodsport, which is crazy because that's 13 years later, right?
Yeah.
So Bruce was someone who trained a lot of tendon and ligament strength. So it is possible that Bruce had stronger tendon ligament strength for things like arm wrestling, right? So according to Chun Wai-man, and Chun Wai-man is not someone who I would consider would be someone who would exaggerate stuff like that, right? So he said,
fibber. Yeah,
he said that Bruce beat Bolo in an arm wrestling contest. so there's, there are a number of interviews with Chun Wai-man. They're all in Cantonese, but they're very, very interesting. I have an audio recording of Chun Wai-man, which was given to me by someone.
Oh, okay.
It was an audio recording taken at some dim sum joint in Hong Kong.
Interview or just a recording?
No. Just like they're at a dim sum place, and you can hear all the people talking in the background.
All right.
And someone was like, asked Chun Wai-man about the Bruce's fight with Lao Tai Chun. And he basically says he doesn't know if they fought, but if they fought, Bruce would have obliterated Lao Tai Chun. And that's basically all I'm kind of at liberty to say.
Okay.
Yeah, about Chun Wai-man. I hope one day to meet him. I know that he has had some health issues lately, and I think that he's having some problems with his voice, I think. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. I mean, we are at that age right now where our heroes are dying, and they're getting older. And so, and we still can't go to Hong Kong yet. I don't know. I don't know.
Over there.
Yeah, still a lot of people. I've met a lot of people. There's still a lot of people I want to meet.
Damn.
Yeah. We got time for one more?
Next up, we got William Sullivan.
All right.
Great Gene LaBelle episode.
It was all right.
It was,
people liked it. Yeah.
It's like 10K in the views.
Ranting.
Could you discuss the veracity of the Muay origin story of Wing Chun? How important was the Red Boat opera in the development of the WCWTVT?
That's a great question. I mean, this is probably the last question of this episode, and this is kind of a meaty question to get into, right? This is probably worthy of an entire episode by itself.
Ooh.
And there are also people...
It might be the first question of the next episode.
Yeah, there are people out there who are far more qualified to talk about this than I am, because the history of Wing Chun is something, obviously, that I'm interested in. I've read all the different takes on the history of Wing Chun, but it is not my area of expertise, because the history of Wing Chun, like the history of most Chinese martial arts, is a dumpster fire of hot nonsense. All right, it's just stories and hearsays and secondhand tellings of third-hand plagiarisms, and I mean, like, even for example, the Shaolin story with the five elders escaping the burning Shaolin temple. Okay,
I love that story.
Most versions of that story are second, third-hand tellings of a story that is a plagiarism of the Hong League's origin story. And the Hong League's origin story of Hong League being the triads. And the triad, the original people that said they came from Shaolin were not the Kung Fu people. It was the original triads that were fighting the Qing government. Yeah. And then later, Kung Fu people adopted the Hong League's origin stories and changed the names and made it fit their stories. All right, so it was originally that, like, the five elders escaped the Shaolin temple burning, which was of course burnt by a traitor who was a Qing dynasty informant or whatever, and then they all escape. And then these five elders originally founded the five lodges of what would later become the triads. Now, before the triads became what they are known nowadays as essentially organized crime, these were anti-Qing rebels or anti-Qing units. And they supposedly had 5 flags or 5 units, and each of them handled a different aspect of fighting the Qing government. So, for example, one flag or section of it would be about training a militia, like in martial arts, to physically fight the Qing government, right? And another one might be intelligence gathering, right? And another one might be espionage, or so, I don't know, something like that, right? And so they created this origin story because you had to be kind of sworn in by blood to become a member of the Hong League, all right? And their story was to instill patriotism among all their members, right? We are from Shaolin, and the Shaolin temple was burned by this damn Qing government, and we need revenge on this, and it was all a false flag puff piece. So the original burning of the Shaolin temple story with the 5 elders that formed the 5 leagues of, or the 5 sections of the Hong League, was a fake story written to inspire patriotism. It was the like a false flag story meant to rile up the people and then join, and it had all like the rules about joining the Hung League and the secret handshakes and all that kind of stuff to join, right? That story was made up. Chinese Kung Fu people, especially later through the Pulp Fiction novels that were about the different Kung Fu styles, plagiarized that story and changed the five elders to Moi or Feng Do Tak or Ti Sim or whatever. And then made those the five founders of the five families of martial arts styles. And then every iteration of that story is second, third, fourth hand, okay? So what you have to realize about the Shaolin Temple origin story is that it's already fifth to 30th hand by the time it comes to you, all right? And that story, even in its original form, is a plagiarism of a fake story. Okay?
Wow.
So that is what that's what we're talking about here. And that's all I got to say about that. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Kung Fu Genius. As always, if you have questions, go ahead and write them in the comments below for a future episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius, hit the bell for notifications, like this video, share it, and as always, I'll see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm sea gung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex Richter, always the...
Boom. Audio recording?
Audio is recording.
All right. Wow, it's funny. I don't hear like all this stuff like when I did the audio. It sounded like we had seashells on our ears. All right. Okay. All right. That stuff he learned from what's wrong with me? He learned from Seong San. You better edit that, Andrew. All right. Freudian slip. One take.
Bloody hell.
One take, Larry.
Good job, man. All right. Good job, guys.
Nice.
Yay, brother!
Ting, ting.